people get stuck not
Mhm.
knowing how to move forward. And part of that is because they're not in touch with themselves. They're not in touch with their values and beliefs and how those can guide them. They're not aligned. And so that's one of the big things I help people do is figure out, okay, so I can't change the past. How can I make my future the way I'd like it to be? I mean, the death of a spouse or family member is really devastating. It's very difficult, and it changes you, and it changes your identity because your world is different. So how can you have to go in and reevaluate? And most of the grief counseling that takes place has to do with just regulating your emotions. But I don't think that's enough. That's why I take people all the way through the transition to their new chapter in life.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney Ann Jenkins. Hello, and welcome to the 96th episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This episode, I have with me Lynn Banis. Within a 3-year span, her world completely crumbled when she lost her mother, her little brother, and her husband. It was as if life had pulled the rug out from under her, and she found herself in a free fall. For months, she struggled with pain, loneliness, and what she called laziness, a lack of a motivation to do anything, and felt lost and wondered if there was any life left in her. She had no desire to move out of the cocoon that she had built around herself, and as she slowly worked through it, it became clearer and clearer that she had no purpose, that there was nothing feeding her soul. She had a loving family who tried their best to support her, and that was wonderful, but she realized that she needed to let them live their own lives and move forward with their own families. So, she began to put her education as a psychologist and years of executive coaching to use on herself. She identified her self-limiting beliefs and changed the ones that were blocking her and replaced them with empowering beliefs. Then did the same for mindset and thought patterns. And she has created a path for coaching to help others understand their own grief. Lynn now helps widows transform loneliness into connection and reclaim joy so that they can create a vibrant and fulfilling new life. Unlike most grief and resilient mentors, she doesn't let her clients remain in the pain and loneliness. She stays with them all the way through, implementing their new chapter of life so that they can be assured they have truly transformed into their best self and life. Grief is a subject that is really important to me as I personally have gone through much of it, as we all have, as it's a part of our life and existence that we don't really often talk about openly or in a way that helps us to process this part of life and rebirth. So here is my conversation with Lynn. So what I usually do is a separate bio introduction of you after our conversation, just so I don't have to go into it being like, "Hey, Lynn, tell me everything about you." That can get kind of daunting when you have a lot of experience. My podcast is about following the inner voice or authenticity or the thing that's driving you or guiding you, whatever you like to call it yourself.
Mhm.
And so one of the first things that I like to ask my guests, and especially because of the nature of your work and how you guide people, there must have been a lot of things that you had to go through in order to get to where you are now. So one of the first places that I like to start is, when did you recognize that you had an inner voice of your own and you were able to follow it?
That's a great question. I love that question. Um, as you live and grow and age, at least for me, that became more and more evident as I aged, but I also struggled with the speaking up as a woman. And so it would frustrate me sometimes. when I felt like I wasn't allowed to follow my own voice. But it's kind of funny. I did it sometimes anyway, and sometimes I didn't do it anyway. So I can't pinpoint an exact time, except that when I decided that I wanted more time with my mother, I started my own business because I was thinking that that would, I could manage my schedule better than being in corporate America. And that turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made.
Mhm.
So at that point, and really from that point on, I think I started really paying attention to what I wanted, what would make me happy.
Excellent. And so your mother, like about how long ago was that?
That was about 2006 or 7. And boy, at that time, my mom wasn't that old. She came to live with me when she was 100,
Oh,
and I cared for her till she was 106 and she passed.
wow.
So, what it did was it allowed me to sometimes spend a couple months in Florida with her. And I had told her at one point that I wouldn't let her be alone when she passed, and I was blessed with being able to be there. So, that time was so precious to both of us. We just cultivated a wonderful relationship. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad I listened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, like in the environment that you grew up in, were you encouraged to follow that authenticity and like explore that yourself?
Yeah, I was. I was. My parents were really good about exposing us to different things, so that we could figure out what it was that we really loved doing and wanted to do. And when we picked something, that was fine. That was fine with them. They supported us.
Yeah, it seems like that's probably true if you were wanting to spend as much time as possible with your mom.
Yeah, yeah. We had a good upbringing and very close family. So I guess that's true.
Yeah, and she lived to be 106. That's incredible.
I
Like,
know.
yeah, what were her secrets? Like what was that wisdom that you gained from her?
Um, I think the most important was her attitude. She refused to be unhappy. And her little eyes sparkled, and she always had a cute little grin on her face. And she was a very strong woman. She had been an Olympic diver in years and years and years ago. Um, and she always took care of her body. She knew, she was amazing about that. I must say I'm not so good about that sometimes, particularly after going through all this grief. You know, but she managed extremely well with that, and I think that positive attitude, and she was very pragmatic. Let me say that she took things, as okay, well, that's the way it is. How do we go forward? And she understood the isolation we all had to go through during COVID better than most people,
Mhm.
and it didn't. Okay, so we stay home and we do stuff at home.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as like your mindset from moving from the more corporate world into something that enabled you to have more freedom, what was that transition like for you and how did that happen?
Well, it happened because I worked for one of the big six consulting firms, and they got closed down. so, so at that point, I decided, I had been an executive coach to the partners in the firm and their groups, their staffs, and I'd also done or I have a doctorate in organizational behavior, human behavior. And so between the coaching and that, I'd done a tremendous amount of leadership development and working with people to help them really enjoy their business lives and their, I don't separate life is life, things go back and forth. And so I just decided to continue my coaching.
Yeah.
And That worked out great.
As far as coaching now, how has that shifted since you moved out of the more corporate leadership executive?
It's, it has and it hasn't. I mean, I don't have clients who are facing the same kind of stress and requirements, since my clients are mostly widows, people who have fairly recently lost a loved one. Um, then it's more the grief, the resilience, the helping them really work on their mindset and their self-talk, and helping them open to opportunities that they are right now probably very closed to. So we work through all of that, and they have the opportunity to rediscover who they are, what their new identity is, and then we work to figure out what they want to do and what the environment needs to be that will support them and to create a vision for their future. And we go forward, and we create a plan, a going forward plan, and implement so that they go actually have a full transition into their new life, which is very exciting.
Yeah, and it seems that people who coach others on specific things such as like grief probably went through something on their own that transformed them to be able to help other people. So, do you have a story or something that you can share that you
Of course. Yes. Within 3 years time, actually 2.5, I lost my mom, my little brother. You're not supposed to lose younger siblings. It was an awful shock. And my husband.
Hmm.
And so I had really compound grief, because within that short time frame, you don't get through, the first one before the next one and the next one. And so, it was really a very difficult time for me, because they were all people who were so special to me. And as I worked through that, I woke up one day, really, I mean, it's kind of a day by day thing and everybody's does it differently, but about a year later, I woke up and I said, dang, I don't care how old I am. I've got all the skills that I need to help other people. And that's what I'm going to do. So it pretty much, I feel like it's my mission for the rest of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Going through that, how can you describe grief and what it actually is in relation to your authentic self and expression and how to navigate that?
That's a great question, because I think that so many people kind of get stuck in the emotional piece of grief, which is very easy. I mean, it is so overwhelming. And I found it to be physically painful. Um, and seems like it goes on forever and ever. And then you feel one day, I feel so much lighter. I feel really good. And then something happens that triggers, and you get that big, huge inundating wave of grief hits you again. And that's one reason I'm doing what I'm doing, is because people get stuck not
Mhm.
knowing how to move forward. And part of that is because they're not in touch with themselves. They're not in touch with their values and beliefs and how those can guide them. They're not aligned. And so that's one of the big things I help people do, is figure out, okay, so I can't change the past. How can I make my future the way I'd like it to be? I mean, the death of a spouse or family member is really devastating. It's very difficult, and it changes you, and it changes your identity because your world is different. So how can you have to go in and reevaluate? And most of the Most of the grief counseling that takes place has to do with just regulating your emotions. But I don't think that's enough. That's why I take people all the way through the transition to their new chapter in life, because people just get so stuck after that grief counseling when they don't know what to do next. And what to do next is figuring out who they are.
Yeah, and I feel like our society doesn't really allow space or even an acknowledgement of grief in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a huge taboo about it. And that's another aspect that I'm trying to do a lot of talks and stuff on, is helping people understand what grief is. How do you support somebody? Because we say, well, we didn't say anything because we didn't know what to say. And I just didn't know what to do for the person. And so I'm trying to teach people what you need to say and do. And by the same token, with my clients, I'm teaching them how to teach their family and friends to support them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've lost a lot of people like throughout the last 5 years myself, and I found myself getting really angry at one point because I felt like there wasn't anyone like who could understand what I needed at the time. And I realized, well, I'm the only person like who knows like what I need right now.
Yeah.
I kind
Yeah.
of have to put that on myself, right? So
Yeah, and that's really hard, because when you're suffering, taking on one more thing, like being responsible for yourself, it's hard. It's daunting.
mhm.
It's daunting. But I tell my clients, the one thing I know for sure is that the women who take all of this into account and act are the ones that come out on the other side with a happy, fulfilling life. If you don't act, you're not going anywhere. And you can get totally stuck in prolonged grief, which is very unhealthy.
Yeah. What would you say is the first step to taking that action from moving from the emotional to like the transformation?
It's you beginning to think about, I can, I, what can I do? Where can I go? What's next? Instead of just staying in that spot where you feel like you want to pull the covers over your head and never get out of bed. Yeah. And there's a bit of readiness, just like there is with reading or anything you're learning, and that is that you have to get through those first stages. And your mind has to start to clear. That grief fog is just, it's just there, and it's so heavy you can't think. And I wouldn't want anybody to be making major decisions about their life until they could think clearly.
Yeah, have you noticed like a certain I know everyone has their own process, but is there sort of like an average amount of time to allow yourself to like stay within that emotional?
Well, most people are on their way out or pretty much out of it by 1 year, although what I'm finding from a lot of people now is that their second year has been really difficult because the numbness has worn off. And now it's like, all right, this is real.
Yeah, I think also another part of it might be that like when something happens initially, there's so much support there, like upfront. And then as time goes on, it kind of like fades away a little bit.
A lot bit. Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge thing. And there's so much that you have to deal with, because your relationship with your family. Now, there's another place where you've got to focus on your authentic self, because family relationships get sometimes very challenging during that time. And it's really a matter of helping the whole person identify and figure out ways to be themselves. But of course, you got to figure out who you are first before you can take that next step. So that's a huge, huge piece.
Yeah, your mother lived until she was 106, and so I imagine that you watched her like go through cycles of losing people like quite often. Did you observe anything from her of how to handle grief?
Oh, she was very stoic.
Yeah.
You know, she was the typical American British background. There, you know, you don't show that. Um, and so I've been a stuffer too for a lot of my life, and through my training, of course, I've learned that how dangerous that can be, and so I try not to do that. But that was my role model. And like I said, she was so pragmatic. It was like, well, you know, this is part of life. We just have to accept it. But that's not helpful to someone who's grieving to hear that. You know, that's one of those things that people might say that really kind of hurts the griever's feelings and is not helpful to them.
How important do you feel that spirituality or having a lens of like a bigger picture helps the process of grieving?
I think it helps immensely. It really it helps because you've got a standard, a value, a belief that there's more to the world than just you, and that things that happen are meaningful. And I don't want to say, you know, I don't think it's helpful to say, well, that was planned, or you know, the person is in a better place or something like that. That's again not helpful to the mourner. But um, if they can see the world as a larger place with meaning, and that their understanding of the spiritual aspect as being supportive is huge.
How did you get through your process? Like, what was the moment where you really understood like what you had gone through and felt that you could help other people?
It was that kind of waking up epiphany that I talked about, that just, I mean, because I had been in that fog, I had been suffering. As a matter of fact, I had pushed way, way, way too hard. Not anything I would suggest to my clients to do. And my body finally said, knock it off. And I was sick for 3 months with one thing after another after another. And that's after I was starting to feel better. That's when it really hit me. You know, and of course I had plenty of time to think while I was not feeling well, and sort things out, you know. But I didn't realize at the time that I was doing this for anybody but me. You know, you're
Mhm.
in that I can't stay here stage. I've got to do something.
Yeah. Did you have a support system around you during that time to help you through?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I've got 3 daughters and they've been amazing.
Yeah. So what is the process like if someone would want to work with you as a coach?
Okay. First of all, we determine where they are, you know, in the process, of course. And because I don't do an off the shelf solution, everything is tailored to where my client is at the point, you know, at the moment. And then we start to look at their thinking processes, you know, what are their self-limiting beliefs? Let's challenge those and replace them with something that's much more supportive. What's their worldview? Is it positive, negative? How can we, you know, how can we challenge some of those beliefs? How can we broaden your perspective? And So we go through that, and then we look at values and beliefs and get those aligned, because they've changed, which is kind of amazing. But while you still might have the same top 4 values, they've probably changed ranking. And even if you still have the same top 4 and the rank is different, you're going to act differently. You're going to, you know, respond to things differently, which is kind of a fascinating thing to me. And then we begin to work on, okay, now I know what I'm about, but how do I function in the world going forward? And I help them identify how they do what they do and what environment needs to be there for them to really I really study times when they're in flow.
Mm,
And, so we get a real handle on, how can you live the kind of life that's not so stressful? And then we once we get through that, then we start working on vision for the future and putting things together. Okay, if I want to do this, what do I have to do? What does the environment need to be like? All of that sort of stuff. And then we can start creating a map
mm.
to get to that place and providing the support for the transition.
Yeah, giving them a hope for a future, actually.
Exactly. Exactly. I always say everybody deserves a life worth living. So let's create that. It's kind of funny, and when you're in the midst of the grief, you don't feel like this is anything positive, but it actually is an opportunity to create a future that is going to be meaningful and fulfilling and joyful. Um, and that's what I want to help people do.
Yeah, and find the gratitude of the moments that you did have to,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
That's a great thing. As a matter of fact, I've kind of suggested to a number of people that you know people are afraid that they're going to forget the person or lose the connection. And so that's one thing I didn't mention before, but that's one thing that's really important, is that we create that life so it honors what you had in your past that you want to carry forward and remember. But one of the things that I suggest people do for holiday, birthday, some of those anniversaries, is to get a container, even a mason jar, and just write down some of the things that they remember, that they were grateful for, that they loved, that they appreciated, and then on that holiday, you can take those and read them and talk about them. And it helps break, if you're with family, for instance, it helps break that we can't talk about this
Yeah.
thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's really uplifting, and it is great for the kids if they've lost a grandparent. You know,
Yeah.
they they need to they need to learn to talk about it.
Yeah, address the elephant in the room. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Because it's tough. It is tough. And this is, right now, I don't know when this will air, but right now, before the holidays, is a really tough time for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is. Kind of like puts more pressure on you to like maybe not remember it or try to like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just did a little workshop on how to survive the holidays, even if you don't wish they were here.
yeah,
um,
relate to
because,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's not just people that are grieving the loss of an individual, but we are all experiencing societal grief right now. And we don't a lot of times we don't know that that's one of the reasons that we're feeling so stressed and depressed and so on. But it's huge because our whole way of life has changed, since COVID.
I was actually gonna bring that up and you brought it up for me. So um
Yeah.
yes. And I think like we've not even begun to go through the grieving process of that period of time.
Mm-mm. No, no, we haven't. I mean, because it's just beginning to settle in that things have changed permanently. And I know my brother and I have talked about how wonderful our upbringing was because it was so free, and we could just get on a bike and go for the day, and our parents never had to worry. And that's just such a huge change to how you have to raise children today. And for those of us who've had even a little bit of that, it's you grieve. I wish my grandchildren had the same kind of freedom in their environment that we had.
Yeah, grieving past versions of yourself too, I think is a huge one.
Yeah. 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 And with a lot of people in my baby boomer age are retiring. So again, that's a big, huge loss of identity. So the grief around that, people don't expect that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's like, well, you can only clean out so many drawers in your garage, and and then it's like, holy cow, now what? If you don't have a major hobby or something or a lot of volunteering, things that keep you going. But it's very difficult to leave a job, for instance, and all of a sudden realize nobody needs you
Mhm.
anymore.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. So it's really getting to know your true self, your authentic self, and knowing even what that means, in the midst of trying to like tread water in society.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And has that changed now that you're in this new environment? And if you have a different perspective now, if then what do you do to be able to live that?
Yes, and also I think like the people around you, it's sometimes challenging for them to understand the growth that you've gone through internally.
Yes,
So they
yes.
try to keep you in this same box that you've always been in.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah, yeah. And that's why I was saying all of your relationships really do change. And and it's some for the better, and some are worse. Some families just can't manage those changes, and that's sad. Then you've got another thing to grieve if your family you know dynamics change in a negative way.
Yeah, but I think that the cycle of the season, like the seasons are kind of like an instrument for us to understand the nature of our existence, of the cycle of death and rebirth, over
Hmm.
again.
Yeah, yeah. And if you can look at all of the big changes in your life as an opportunity for rebirth, um that's pretty exciting. That's an incredible activity to do, is kind of a timeline, and take a look at how those things have affected you, and how you've adapted and not adapted, and what that meant to you as you were moving along in life.
And maybe I find that it gets easier, like the more that you are actively allowing the surrender of those things, and you kind of almost look forward to those moments of being able to let something fall away and like
Yeah,
reemerge.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's one part of life that a lot of people just don't understand, is it's all about allowing the universe to bring whatever to you, and not holding on to your beliefs and ideas and who you think you are so tightly that you can't open up and let those things touch you, so that you can perhaps have different experiences.
Absolutely. And you work with widows in particular, is that right? Like that's
I
kind of
do, but I work with widowers, I work with trauma patients, anybody who's experienced a big loss. I mean, even losing your job, that's huge. Anytime you lose your identity is a good place for me to be.
yeah.
I don't want to lose mine right now, but I've been there, done that recently.
Yeah, maybe give you a little break.
Thanks.
So if people would like to work with you, if they're going through a challenging time of their identity loss or a big change,
Uh-huh.
how can they work with you?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, and I have a link there where they can get in touch with me through my calendar and that sort of thing. And I will be glad to make sure you have that. Um, and I have a little uh, download on how to deal with the ubiquitous "How are you?" question, which is very tough when you're not feeling like you're well at all or you're happy at all. So I'm glad to send that to you and you could post that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll put all of those links into the show notes so people can click on it really easily and find you.
All right, that's terrific.
Yeah. Is there anything on the top of your mind or your heart, like specifically about grieving or going through the loss of an identity that we haven't talked about yet?
I think that one of the things that is so important to understand is that each person has what they need. They just need to uncover it and they just need um, to figure out how to use that. So, I always say if you don't have a mentor who will take you by the hand and walk you through that process, then find one. Find somebody like me that can help you get through and really, find a way to live the life you'd love to live.
Yeah.
Because it's all there.
Yeah. People have done it. Find those people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. This has been wonderful. I have one last question that I like to ask to sort of wrap up the conversation, and that can like open it up for more, or it can be very simple. It's kind of whatever you like. So,
Okay.
if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
If it was a billboard,
Yeah. What would it say to the world?
I think it would say a lot of what I just said. You have everything you need to live a good life.
Yeah.
Discover it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was very, very fun. I enjoyed it very much, and you had some wonderful questions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.